The expectations on Redfall were very high for the Xbox gaming community, and much of this is down to the lack of first-party games from Xbox studios. There's no way to sugarcoat this. It not only failed on those expectations, it lowered expectations looking forward.
I'm fine. It's fine.
Now, our review covers the biggest issue with the game in its design, gameplay, controls, and lack of any soul. Check that out to learn more. This review will focus on the artistic and technical issues that hamper the title even more at times than the gameplay. I'll break this down into 3 key areas, so let's start with one of the biggest. Right when it was announced the game would target 30 FPS on consoles as a current generation Series X exclusive for a console marketed heavily on its 4K 60 FPS standards, this was going to be a tough sell. Now 30 FPS is fine, and I'm certainly not someone that demands 60 FPS plus or death. But as an online Twitch or arena style looter shooter, this is a bigger deal. But consistency always trumps sheer speed when it comes to games, and sadly, Redfall has neither locked down as of launch code. Starting with the best of the bunch in the Series X, it's often a stable 30 FPS readout, and most importantly, the frame time cadence is even, meaning with motion blur enabled, at least it delivers an overall consistent level of performance. As dead and lifeless as the entire Massachusetts town is, and certainly not in a good way. The issues arise as you move through the town, and the game then hits all of the issues of this early access title, in all but name. Now, Unreal Engine 4 that powers it can lower the barrier of entry for teams to make a game, but it doesn't mean it does everything for you. The quality of the assets, the materials, the animation, and world density overall doesn't or never will correlate directly with performance. But here the game struggles with CPU single-thread demands causing its own severe issues, and along with the overall LOD, memory management, and streaming, is the main reason we have this 30 FPS cap. Well, that and any game in its beta status will have severe performance issues, as we see here. Walking through a ghost town with no enemies or action within miles, the game suddenly pauses and stutters for sometimes 300 plus milliseconds, which can feel like full-on pauses. These are then followed by a sequence of erratic frame time spikes until the engine course corrects and that 33 millisecond time is resumed. The problem is, this can happen far too often on the Series X, where the expectation would be 60 FPS. At the very least, we want a smooth 30, and we don't see that, at least not all the time. These issues can crop up at any time, and sometimes they can last for a couple of seconds or less, which, as infrequent as they are, they should simply not be present at all. Now next, the Series S offers a similar level of performance, but as you would expect, it's just worse, or lower quality than the Series X. The issues present in the same way, but can be bigger and more prolonged, and when they do, this is likely being exacerbated by the lower memory pool and bandwidth the console has. As such, we see similar 300-400 millisecond spikes, and at worst, low 20 FPS readouts. Again, this is never terrible taken as a whole, but the inconsistency and general randomness from the player's perspective at least, it's simply not a pleasing experience, and this is hampered further on both consoles with poor controls that are far from precise enough for the shooting mechanic the game is built around. For a 30 FPS title, the input latency is actually pretty good. It's likely a double buffered game on all formats, which helps on input times, but it can also hinder the stutters when they occur, due to only having 2 frames in flight, the one you can see on screen and the one being rendered in the background. But when turning or shooting, the wide dead zone on the sticks can become something of an issue, an inconsistent issue of late on Xbox titles, and it can make the title feel even worse, again delivering on my nemesis of inconsistency. Being a 30 FPS title though, it is helped by the motion blur, but that can also muddy the screen, and most, including myself, in this kind of title will turn it off, helping aiming in low visible areas, which is a problem in the game due to the poor and bland art style along with muted colour tones. By far the worst though is that PC version, and this enables us to see just why that 30 FPS cap is in place. As expected before launch, the game has a wealth of issues with its rendering and logic work going on under the hood, but when you extend the frame time, you can in some ways mitigate that quickly or reduce the impact it has on performance, if not fully resolve it. which we just covered in the console performance levels, showing that they still have work to do. But on PC, even capping to 30 FPS doesn't resolve this, and you can still have sub 20 FPS moments crop up, again at any point in the game, but likely related to streaming in new data, sound bites, or other scripted changes causing context switches and thus stutters, along with the good old nemesis of DirectX 12 shader compilation stutter, which this game also has because it doesn't pre-compile shaders at the start. Not an issue on console, but certainly one on PC. As mentioned in my previous reviews, the split and non-unified pools of RAM on PC, higher API cost alongside driver impact, means that any issues present in the engine on console will likely hit harder on PC. And it's what we see here in our readout, as this Nvidia sponsored title, my RTX 2070 here, is certainly not able to power through these, and it's far beyond the power of the Series S, and yet it can still perform worse at times. The issues here though are not CPU or GPU related directly, but are just general bugs, bad code paths, branching, and general code issues that need to be resolved. See here when this audio file is streamed in from the radio chatter. The CPU drops to basically 1% utilization, and the GPU is maxed out, as the CPU is simply late in passing draw calls and setup work for the GPU, and as such, it tries to rush through that work as fast as it can. Once that sample stops playing, normal service is resumed. It's a terrible state of affairs, and on a mouse and keyboard this is a deal breaker, with control almost impossible to manage, and this can happen simply running around a corner. The frame rate can go from a smoothish 60 FPS to sub 20, and frame times end up looking more like an ECG of a marathon runner. Now, better hardware in CPU would likely help some of this, as the game can be bound by single or dual threads, similar to my Jedi Survivor review last week. And unlike that game though, that is pushing physics, fidelity and scale at the high end, meaning some of those problems made more sense. Here, the flat, barren ghost town of a game matched with low enemy count, horrendous AI in air quotes, and combat, it feels more like a punch in the groin than anything else. Now, Arkane have always been a very stylish and unique studio with all of their titles, from the most recent 60s funk-inspired futuristic Deathloop to the seminal Dishonored and Dishonored 2 that crafted rich and evocative worlds with exaggerated character designs, dreamscape worlds mixed with rich gothic-inspired architecture. Redfall looks and plays like a free-to-play mobile game in every single way, and that has been designed to try and look like an Arkane game, where the minimalistic materials, low poly counts and high dependency on imposters all gelled well with the clear and defined art style, smooth and fluid animation, bustling city, physics-based combat, dismemberment, and most important of all, a well-grounded, expanding and rewarding combat system that allows you to tackle the relatively weak AI in a multitude of ways. It suspended your disbelief and engaged you to become immersed and impressed with the rich tapestries it had built for you to explore. Redfall has all of the same limits in low poly counts, high imposters used on objects, popping of the world and frugal materials, but it lacks all of the style, charisma, skill and world building the previous titles had in abundance. The quirky character designs look like a cheap knockoff or satire of those designs, well known by Arkane now.
You got ladies' hands, you got your mother's hands.
The materials and textures are truly terrible, with late bitmaps loading in or not at all across all hardware. The Series X can take 22 seconds nearly to load in some textures, some leaving just flat vertex lighting and base albedo, often an issue on the Series S, which struggles most with texture streaming and quality, but even the PC and Series X can suffer here. And in fact, the Series X is worse than PC. In addition, many of the core textures are of a very low quality, looking as if they were pulled from a previously cancelled Xbox One or even Xbox 360 title, and some attempted upscaling was applied, but sadly, not always. You will see low, blurry, blocky textures very often, and when and if they do improve, it can take too long while staring at them, as if rubbing your eyes after a heavy night out. In terms of visual improvements, the Series X has significantly higher level of detail over the Series S, which can have billboard imposters or sprite imposters used extensively. Shadow maps are significantly reduced on the Cascade and the resolution quality, as is Grass and Alpha, which can be reduced on the Series S over the Series X. And on top of that, SSR is fully removed on the Series S, Aside from occasional fixed animated sequences where it crops up, it generally has none of the higher effects that the Series X and PC has. This includes depth of field being reduced, bloom being reduced and of a lower precision, but sometimes it can actually have higher geometry levels than the Series X, as you can see here on this Windows section in this opening cinematic. In addition, the game uses screen space shadows quite often to complement the shadow cascade, and this can be used more aggressively on the Series S to compensate for the lack of that shadow cascade quality and distance into the camera. Character models all look very similar, as does the lighting, and the field of view to 120 is still present, but overall what you'll see on the Series S is a game that struggles more with texture bitmap loading, struggles with lower quality resolutions and effects, everything looks less precise, and overall the Series X comes somewhere in between, closest to high on most settings, with level of detail being slightly lower than the highest on PC, as are shadows. SSR is slightly higher quality on PC as well. But fundamentally, most of the differences come down to things like volumetrics and alpha effects, which can be of a higher quality on the PC. But generally, it's very hard to spot, and the comparisons between the lowest rung in the Series S to the highest rung in PC is generally quite small. And in fact, the biggest delta between the two, both in image quality and effects, is resolution. The Series X comes with a native 3840 by 2160, no signs of FSR2 or any upscaling are in use, whereas the Series S relies on almost certainly FSR2 running the quality level, which means it runs a 1707 by 960p output, which is then reconstructed back to 2560 by 1440. This fundamentally creates a very similar looking image quality and effects due to the relatively low fidelity assets and materials and not high geometry and detail across the board. Generally, the game doesn't demand high resolutions, and this is borne out by the difference between the two images. There certainly is a slight increase in texture details and assets and overall image quality on the Series X over the Series S. The two standout issues on the Series S over the Series X are the lower resolution and reconstruction, which can cause some issues on fog volumes in the game, as you see here, and the reduced memory pool causing worse texture details than any other platform tested here, but generally they're bad on every single piece of hardware. And that sums up the overall visual quality. Even on the best in the PC's Epic, this isn't a looker at all, and it certainly doesn't look like a current generation exclusive in any way, shape or form.
She's coming. She'll want to see for herself.
Which brings us to the final one of the three elements, and that is the overall quality of the game. It does have some fairly good, but fairly mundane features at least. Dynamic time of day allows the game to shift into day and night, key for a vampire title, even if it's completely wasted here, making almost no impact on gameplay other than cosmetic. Effect quality is weak, with basic fire alpha effects and blood splats, peppered with a better use of GPU particles on vampire destruction, looking to imitate the same effect from the Blade trilogy. Cascaded shadow maps are used extensively with some success, as they're mixed with screen space shadows, adding contact shadows on characters and incidental objects. The largely single light sources in the games and lack of any pre-computed or dynamic global illumination can be the main reason the game looks so flat and lifeless, no matter where you are. In addition, the game does not use any real PBR materials, which adds to the general look of skin, metals, wood and water, all feeling like a last generation title. But by far the biggest problem is the lack of polish and the bugs the game has in its current state. Shadow maps update every frame, along with that time of day system, causing a very unstable and flickering image, which is not only distracting, it can actually be annoying. The enemies are so crude in their cone of vision and combat states, both the humans and vampires can be very simply strafed and dodged and then killed within a few seconds, offering no real challenge and feeling more like an obstruction. Bad enough, but the spawning and tracking of these is often bugged, with vampires very often just floating above you and talking but not attacking, then to disappear completely and spawn elsewhere, most certainly not by design. Height maps can warp into and out of place as you move through the world on all platforms. The popping of trees and imposters is very severe, and compounded by the cascaded shadow maps can cause huge shifts in shadows as the world appears to shift in and out in real time around you, and not in a Legacy of Kain manner. At first I actually thought this was a gameplay feature, but it's just another one of those long list of bugs. Animation and physics are woeful, and enemies can moonwalk around cars with clear leaps from one animation set to another. Another big issue, and a gameplay one at that, are the hitboxes are far too big, with characters standing behind invisible barriers at times through railings where you clearly hit them and it doesn't count. Not only that, you can shoot them bang on and the hitbox doesn't count, you have to move it right to the heart of the character, meaning the hitboxes are far too big or far too small, or even misaligned. The performance woes on PC are terrible though, with it often just slowing down at random points, causing both frame rates, animation and game logic to be slowed whilst it does. Turning down a street can provide drastic shifts in performance, along with additional issues on PC in terms of using FSR. I had this horrible flickering, over-sharpening and terrible performance here, and in the end I had to quit the game and reload it to get it to work properly. There's just so many bugs across the PC that are even heightened over the ones on console, it just makes it hard to play on any format. But most damning of all is the game is a barren, empty wasteland with no reason why most, if all of these issues exist, because there's simply nothing to do. Even with all the bugs and issues noted here, and more I can't cover for time, such as the dialogue being left over on top, which leaves prompts on screen as you're talking, both sloppy and jarring. It looks and plays and feels like it's just entered the beta stage of development, and I would assume a triage list as long as a vampire's arm is on the cards, which is a deal breaker on any platform, Xbox exclusive or not.
Found him!
In summary, Redfall was meant to be the start of Xbox's strong 2023 lineup, and as it stands, it feels like something dug up from a previous life. Bare bones in content, lacking polish, and far from an Xbox One showcase, let alone the potential the Series X and even Series S has, leaving a tragedy for the legacy of Arkane, with this being nothing more than a hollow shell of their former glory, summed up by Dishonored 2 on the last generation consoles being superior in almost every possible facet. I do hope they can improve on the issues, expand the game's combat, mission and overall quality, with the icing being a potential true 60 FPS mode on PC and console, although that's the least of their worries. This may be a game focused on the undead, but the only thing it sucked more was my desire to play any further than this technical review. And that's it for the deep dive into game performance, pixels and all things graphics related. If you like what we do here on IGN Performance Reviews, then keep it IGN, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You will never see the sun again.